Welcome to Justice Unveiled, where we confront the realities of racial discrimination head on.
We will explore the complexities of racial bias and its impact on the criminal justice system.
Join us as we challenge stereotypes, amplify marginalized voices, and advocate for equality and justice.
My name is Jaleesa.
My name's Giovanni.
I'm Stephanie.
I'm On.
And I'm Christine. Stephanie will be starting us off as she will discuss how racism started in our criminal justice system.
The concept of justice in our society is one that demands critical examination. Unfortunately, our justice system isn't as fair or free as it claims to be, especially when it comes to matters of race. Looking at slavery, for example, slavery casts a long shadow over the history in our country. While the 13th Amendment was supposed to grant freedom for all, its exception does include criminals. This then led to the racial discrimination, particularly in the realm of criminal justice. Slavery placed economic importance in our country. With it being gone, African Americans were disproportionately targeted and arrested and put into prison, often for minor offenses that were selectively enforced under discriminatory laws, for instance, the Black Codes. The Black Codes were laws designed to regulate the lives of African Americans. They were to control their movement and have them working in farms for white laborers. Essentially, they would force their labor and back into plantations. It prohibited them from doing many things like owning firearms, buying liquor, and engaging in businesses outside of farming. Black criminology further deepens societal prejudices, painting minorities as criminals and perpetrating harmful stereotypes through biased imagery and narratives. I like to bring the example of the film Birth of a Nation. It came out in 1915. Essentially, it was a racist movie. It's a white man's perspective of after the Civil War. It painted many African Americans in a negative light, many acting as Black men themselves and causing problems by wanting to rape women. It made the KKK members seem as heroic because they would save people from evil African Americans. Even President Woodrow Wilson claimed this film to be a history written by lightning. It made African Americans seem like animal-like beings. After this film, the KKK was also revived after being dismantled for several years. Membership of the Ku Klux Klan increased around 1920. How do you guys feel about this film? Do you think it caused the century of racism?
I think it brought it out, if anything. It allowed people to be more open, with racism.
Yeah. And this actually caused a lot of horrific acts like lynching. Lynching was a barbaric act that took the lives of many African Americans, inflicting pain on their families and their communities. Their killings were brutal and occurred to serve justice for alleged crimes, which were often wrongful accusations. Looking at the case of Emmett Till, who was killed for whistling at a white lady. Because of this horrible act, her husband took, tortured, and lynched him. He was only 14 years old, and no one ever did time for his murder. Further segregation and Jim Crow laws would make minorities feel and be seen as less than. The civil rights movements and activists like Martin Luther King were seen as criminals for violating segregation laws, many who were arrested and incarcerated in masses. After the civil rights movement in the 1970s, the war on drugs began to try to reduce drug trafficking in this country. President Richard Nixon brought aggressive law enforcement tactics to increase arrest and incarceration rates. In many cases, a white person would be given a lighter sentence for being in possession of cocaine, while an African American would be sent to prison for years for being in possession of crack cocaine. It is critical to confront these uncomfortable truths and understand how they continue to shape our present reality. How do you guys feel about the realities of historical events like that of the film Emmett Till and the war on drugs and its influence on minority groups?
For me personally, I would have never known about like the backgrounds of African American people in the US because I wasn't born here until like I was educated on stuff like these about racism and the war on drugs. It's it's heartbreaking to know that like the lynching was allowed during the time. Like that's technically murder. Even if it's like even if whites and blacks weren't even back then, it should have been considered murder for having somebody lynched in public like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look online, there's even postcards of people being lynched and a whole group of people smiling, like celebrating like they did something good, like they served justice, when really it's just cruel.
My personal take on like the history of all this is that I kind of see it as not really history because we kind of see this in like present day, right? We have a lot of like different like police practices and laws that target these low-income minority communities, and it's kind of like history's renewing itself over again, right? Like obviously we're not like lynching people, right? We're not scared of killing them, but we're kind of like we're like holding them back from being like normal human beings compared to like the majority.
Yeah, even as like you said, the like drug laws, like white people could afford powder cocaine, meanwhile, black people could only afford crack cocaine, and they charged them differently. So it's really criminalizing being African American.
Especially how they receive like higher fines and longer incarceration for the same type of crime almost. Well, it's almost like a slap on the wrist type of punishment for anyone who's white.
Yeah, to add on like the war on drugs and stuff like that, I am in the drugs and the war on drugs class, and we talked about the war on drugs and how it was brought up, and the fact that it was more of not really criminalizing drugs, but more on the fact that it was a power play against African Americans, and like it was a way for them to easily incriminate them and put them in prison because they're the ones that was in possession of these drugs. Even though the drugs itself was bad, it was more on criminalizing them.
Next, we'll have Anne, who will delve into the dynamics of policing styles, particularly addressing critical issues of over-policing and aggression.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So over-policing has been a hot topic for a while now. It's in fact it's quite known throughout like at least people keeping up with the news, especially related to like law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And first, I want to talk about this article for a bit, written by Jennifer Kobina and Dolores Jones, and they kind of talk about like I think it's a really present issue of this warrior style policing that law enforcement agencies currently use. So basically, this style of policing is a very like aggressive crime fighting style approach to criminals. So basically, police officers they're taught to be very aggressive towards suspected criminals who they think like could have committed crimes in order to like almost like as a fear tactic and to make them seem strong against crime. It's also like a preventative measure. You know, they want people to fear the police force. And the reason why this is like obviously it's a problem, right? We don't want police officers to be overly aggressive to like this normal citizens. The problem with this is that it's used discriminately. Like we see this force our policing used almost exclusively against like minorities and people of like the low income. And like that's because it's kind of like a power trip for these police officers, right? They can use their authority to like bully people who they think are below them. And it's really bad because they let their own egos get into the job field, right? And of course, this leads to like violence against the police. People like when we see like these police officers being aggressive to just anybody, of course we get mad, right? Of course we have like some hostility towards the police, and we get this really like negative relationship with police. And I just want to know you guys' thoughts on like this policing style in general.
I think sometimes it's definitely excessive, and there's other ways to go around that. They shouldn't use aggression just because they suspect someone to be a criminal. They should be sure they are, and yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, obviously, I agree, right? We don't want people being aggressive, right? And that's why they also mentioned this other style, which is this guardian style of policing, where police are more meant to be like protectors of the public, right? And I don't know why this style is not being like integrated more, or at least like it's not being mixed in more style. But obviously, we don't want criminals getting in the way, but we don't want the police to be like too nice as well. We want them to have sort of be like a middle ground for everything. And I wanted to bring up this statistic real quick. And I quote, over the life course, 1 in every 1,000 Black men in the US can expect to be killed by the police. And what are you guys' thoughts on this? Because if we were to put that number in a different way, that's only 0.10% chance of like you dying to the police, which is not good, right? We don't want anybody dying to the police, but what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's more important that like they have to think about it like that. Like there's a fear between the police and minority groups. And like that's an issue because like that shows distrust between the groups. And can you really trust the police, or are they gonna be overly hostile towards you? I know like when I got my driver's license, my father would say, when they pull you over, put your hands on the wheel. Cause like that's how like we're raised to think.
Yeah, I agree with Giovanni. Instead of feeling like the police are protecting us and serving us, we're afraid of them. We don't want to get hurt. And in some situations, especially for African Americans, they're afraid to be killed.
Yeah, I agree too. I feel like police officers nowadays, they tend most of their interactions with African Americans or the minorities, it tends to escalate because they start thinking how they already are criminalizing minorities, because and then they start thinking, oh yeah, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do that, so I should do this, which escalates the situation, which brings out the aggression and all these things that police officers do, which are caught on like body cams as well. So I definitely agree.
Yeah, thank you for that input. And what you said directly goes into what I'm saying next about racial profiling, right? These police officers, right? They're profiling these people, like specifically like Black people, Mexican Americans, African Americans. They have this racial profile of them already as like dangerous criminals, which makes sense as to why they're so aggressive towards them, doing like normal traffic stops and stuff. And obviously, this is like a really bad thing. We don't want people especially a police, to be judging people based on their race, on how dangerous they are, or like that's just not it's not the correct thing to do. But I wanted to differentiate these two terms first before I want to hear your guys' thoughts. So we have racial profiling, which is what I just explained, and then we have criminal profiling, which is the use of it's an investigative strategy to identify perpetrators through, previous criminal cases based on like things such as personality and like behavior of past criminals, just trying to find out like, hey, could this person be a potential suspect? And I just want to know you guys' thoughts. Like, do you think these two are connected? Because obviously we know like a vast majority of Black people, African Americans, they're put into the criminal justice system and they're incarcerated like way more compared to the majority like white people. And which would mean that the data that people look at for criminal profiling would be primarily like Black people. So I just wanted to know if you guys thought like, is there something wrong with that? Because should they should like the should the sample size be mostly comprised of like the minority instead of across all races?
I think sometimes it's definitely excessive, and there's other ways to go around that. They shouldn't use aggression just because they suspect someone to be a criminal. They should be sure they are, and yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, obviously, I agree, right? We don't want people being aggressive, right? And that's why they also mentioned this other style, which is this guardian style of policing, where police are more meant to be like protectors of the public, right? And I don't know why this style is not being like integrated more, or at least like it's not being mixed in for style. Because obviously, we don't want criminals getting in the way, but we don't want the police to be like too nice as well. We want them to have sort of be like a middle ground for everything. And I wanted to bring up this statistic real quick. And I quote, over the life course, 1 in every 1,000 Black men in the US can expect to be killed by the police. And what are you guys' thoughts on this? Because if we were to put that number in a different way, that's only 0.10% chance of like you dying to the police, which is not good, right? We don't want anybody dying to the police, but what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's more important that like they have to think about it like that. Like there's a fear between the police and minority groups. And like that's an issue because like that shows distrust between the groups. And can you really trust the police, or are they gonna be overly hostile towards you? I know like when I got my driver's license, my father would say, when they pull you over, put your hands on the wheel. Cause like that's how like we're raised to think.
Yeah, I agree with Giovanni. Instead of feeling like the police are protecting us and serving us, we're afraid of them. We don't want to get hurt. And in some situations, especially for African Americans, they're afraid to be killed.
Yeah, I agree too. I feel like police officers nowadays, they tend most of their interactions with African Americans or the minorities, it tends to escalate because they start thinking how they already are criminalizing minorities, because and then they start thinking, oh yeah, they're gonna do this, they're gonna do that, so I should do this, which escalates the situation, which brings out the aggression and all these things that police officers do, which are caught on like body cams as well. So I definitely agree.
Yeah, thank you for that input. And what you said directly goes into what I'm saying next about racial profiling, right? These police officers, right? They're profiling these people, like specifically like Black people, Mexican Americans, African Americans. They have this racial profile of them ready as like dangerous criminals, which makes sense as to why they're so aggressive towards them when like normal traffic stops and stuff. And obviously, this is like a really bad thing. We don't want people especially a police, to be judging people based on their race, on how dangerous they are, or like that's just not a it's not the correct thing to do. But I wanted to differentiate these two terms first before I want to hear your guys' thoughts. So we have racial profiling, which is what I just explained, and then we have criminal profiling, which is the use of it's an investigative strategy to identify perpetrators through, previous criminal cases based on like things such as personality and like behavior of past criminals, to try to find out like, hey, could this person be a potential suspect? And I just want to know you guys' thoughts. Like, do you think these two are connected? Because obviously, like a vast majority of Black people, African Americans, they're put into the criminal justice system and they're incarcerated like way more compared to the majority like white people. And which would mean that the data that people look at for criminal profiling would be primarily like Black people. So I just wanted to know if you guys thought like, is there something wrong with that? Because should they should like the should the sample size be mostly comprised of like the minority instead of across all races?
I think using criminal profiling is good in some cases, like traits that contribute to like serial killers, but not to justify like someone being a criminal for their race. I think factors of race shouldn't even be considered, because then that way they just assume like, oh, like these are our statistics.
Acting the point, right? Like they need all these stats are based off the minority because they keep like discriminating against discriminating against them. Therefore, they're arrested more, and it's kind of like it's all criminal activities based on like communities of color and minorities. It's just I think it's just wrong in general for like this kind of policing practice to be in the system still.
Yeah, I feel like they're just basically stereotyping them in a way, and it's like bad or like really bad stereotyping, like stigma, and yeah, it's just a negative connotation towards their race, and it's not right. So I agree.
Yeah, and then I just have one last question on this topic specifically. But do you guys think racial profiling is systemic, or is it kind of like more of a deep-rooted social issue?
I
I
think
think it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead, Jalissa.
No, no, no. I think it's deeply rooted. It's definitely deeply rooted. They based the criminal justice system. Once they were able to free the slaves, they started to create more prisons, and they were trying to find different ways to incarcerate them and eventually use them, kind of cycle through this pattern of using African Americans, minorities to use for free labor inside of the prisons. Same thing they were doing before slavery. And then yeah, I think it's deeply rooted.
I agree. Like what Stephanie was talking about in the beginning about the history and what Julissa just brought up. It's definitely deeply rooted into our criminal justice system as well as society, where African Americans or minorities are criminalized against or like are racially profiled. They were considered criminals in the beginning, and they're still using there's still policies and laws that prevents them from having equal rights than everybody else. So I agree.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys. I think obviously, the government was made to serve the people. So therefore, if this problem is deeply rooted within society, that means our system would reflect that, which makes sense that, our system is completely like against minorities and stuff. And then I wanted to move on to not really a major over policing practice, but I still think it's considered over policing, and that's like an excessive use of police patrols. And my reasoning for that is kind of like, I wouldn't want to have somebody watching me at all times, right? It kind of feels like they're incriminating me just for me going along my life, right? Just because of who I am, they think I'm doing something wrong already. And then obviously we see like the use of police patrols used more in like areas of not only high crime, but just like minorities, because that's who they're criminalizing and that's where they think the crime's happening. So I just wanted to hear you guys' thoughts on like, how would you feel if like you had a bunch of police patrols in your area, or maybe if you can like uh give us some more insight on it, just what you think about how police patrols can affect the relationship between law enforcement and the people.
I think police patrols can be good, but the way that they're doing it is wrong. Cause like you have areas that like are over policed, like you have police going around all over these minority areas, and they're like looking for crime. They're looking for and trying to like imprison them, not like trying to understand the situation and not trying to like understand what's wrong with the community.
Over policing is definitely targeted. Um, it's um, it's definitely they choose to target these communities that are definitely low level or low status communities, poverty. It's because of they're not likely to get away with um like if they were put on bail and stuff, they can't get themselves out. So and it um increases prison rates and it's just a whole cycle.
I would also like to add to the topic of over policing. I definitely see it where I'm from. I live in South Central, so I definitely always see a lot of cops. Uh, yeah. Once I came home, it was around, I want to say 12 in the morning. I was looking for parking. The streets were empty, and the cops flashed their bright light at me. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but of course, they're looking for crime. They suspect something to go wrong in this area because, South Central. And essentially, it's just, they're looking for crime. It's just because we're in a low-income minority community.
Yeah, I would also like to add, like, you take for what you're from and you see police and it's inducing fear onto your community. But you take over policing and having more patrols up in like Beverly Hills, for example, they're gonna claim it as being more safe because they feel more as if they're being watched over and protected. But instead, like the police and patrol, it's threats. They're a threat to the minority communities and to induce fear.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one last point. I just think it's very sinister how this works, right? Because we know like minorities and just minorities in general, like they have a lack of resources in our society, right? Lack of education, especially with like things with like the bail system, they can't pay off the bail if they get um if they get held in prison to go to court. I feel like it's very sinister because it's targeted towards them and it keeps on making them suffer more, especially with over policing. Like we don't need that much police. Like, I can go from one city to another and like the police would be like entirely different people just based on like the ethnic group and the culture of like the cities. So yeah, I think it's just very sensitive how over policing practices are used against minority groups. And beyond race-based policing practices, there are practices that disproportionately and unjustly afflict minorities post-arrest. And I hand it off to Giovanni to tell you more about
All right, thanks, on. Race certainly has a huge part in the trial system, influencing and causing disparities in the type of sentence issued. Following a conviction, judges determine what type of sentence to give, deciding between incapacitating someone and isolating them from society during incarceration, or providing them a second chance and having them rectify their behavior through probation. Probation is a reintegrative, community-based sentence that allows convicted individuals to remain in the community and maintain their daily lives, provided they follow some conditions set by the court. These conditions range in restrictiveness, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Probation is great. It's a great opportunity for criminals. However, the determination between who gets probation and who gets incarceration is racialized. It's based on racialized practices. Judges have developed an internalized bias perspective against African Americans that stems from experience and stereotypes that state African Americans pose a greater threat to the community and are less likely to be rehabilitated. This goes back to Alan's racial profiling that he covered, and this is very detrimental as it has led to disparities in probations. As according to the US Sentencing Commission, African Americans are 23.4% less likely to receive probation for similar crimes. Furthermore, African Americans who do not get probation are subjected to more probation restrictions compared to their white counterparts. The more restrictive probation controls are, the more likely individuals are to violate their probation and consequently become imprisoned due to a technical violation, and not that they committed a new crime. Finally, judges discriminate in their sentencing with sentencing lengths, as African Americans face a 9% longer sentence compared to whites for the same crime after controlling for all the aggravating factors like previous felonies, with this rate going up to 13% for drug-related offenses. We're over-criminalizing African Americans. The system has predisposed African Americans to receiving incarceration and for longer lengths of sentence. After all that data that proves judicial bias, I want to hear your opinion about what you guys think we can do to make the judicial system more fair.
So I wanted to talk a bit about like how these judges have like, they racial profile the people that come in. I think one solution could be like kind of back in history, like all these judges, as they get older and older, they keep these like old ideas. So especially things like slavery, they might have brought that with them into the courtroom. So I guess one solution would be to bring in like younger judges who can, they're more open-minded to different scenarios, races. Yeah, I think that could solve a potential problem within judges specifically.
I'd love to add on to that. Like the judges right now, like only 9% of the judges are Black, are African Americans. Meanwhile, Black people make up 37% of the criminals. So like there's just this lack of diversity in the judicial system. Like we don't have an African American perspective judging them.
I want to add on. I feel like to make it more fair, maybe their cases should be like blind cases, like they can pick it up without knowing what the person's race was or who they are. Like more like so it's not very biased. So they don't have like a pre what is that called? What is that word? Pre they don't have a they can't there's no prejudgment before they are put into the position as a judge for like a specific trial or case. So yeah, I agree.
So I also just want to add that, sorry, um, we should develop a way to find racial disparities, within like the system, because also like how Christine, everybody mentioned, kind of like how those prejudgment, like pre-assumptions that people have, like it's not fair to have, because I think if they were to just read the crime and then like what happened, what took place, how violent, non-violent it is, I think definitely like people would get, it would become different like statistics, data in that case, because then, maybe there would be more like African American people being on probation compared to white people. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to throw something in there, but This may sound maybe kind of out there, but maybe judges are given much discretion, especially deciding like sentencing, right? Um, yes, there is like minimums and maximums they have to go based on, but I think in the end, judges just have too much discretion between like, how long this time is and maybe like uh sorry, like eligibility for like probation and like other stuff. Because when you're incarcerated, obviously you're locked away from society, right? And you're being ostracized, kind of like what we already do with minorities, right? We're seeing them as at least like the majority, we're seeing them as like inferiors, but in reality, it's not that case, right? It's just they're actually the majority, and then I don't know, it's a weird dynamic in the society right now.
I want to add on more. I feel like people have these already like unconscious bias. Like we are biased unconsciously without knowing that we're being biased. So another thing to have like a fair system or a judicial system is to like mandate a special training for judges to not have those to not have like the unconscious bias that they already have in their head about a certain race, certain type of crime, like all that stuff. But yeah, I feel like it should be mandated to have like a non-biased training like kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah,
with
same
what
with
you're
like police, right?
Yes, same with the police. Sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. They need more training. I feel like sometimes they need to put themselves in the situations or in the shoes of people who are accused of committing those crimes because they need to consider other factors like where they grew up, the neighborhoods they grew up, and how sometimes they're actually really racially discriminated. And I'd like to bring up a TED Talk I saw not too long ago. Um, a sociologist was talking about her experience living in a minority neighborhood, and she was saying how these kids they see racial discrimination so much that they even play cops and tackle each other and handcuff each other and say like, "Do you have any drugs on you?" And I think that's really unfair. Another thing she brought up was this 18-year-old boy who was in high school. He grew up with a mom who would do a lot of drugs, so he basically raised by his grandpa. And in school, one of his classmates called his mom a crack whore. And so he pushed them, and he was given a charge for aggravated assault and then sent to prison. And he couldn't afford bail. And when he finally got out, he already had a debt for court fees. And then later, he was stopped for driving his girlfriend's car, taking his little brother to school. And he didn't know his girlfriend's car was a stolen car because her uncle had given it to her. And then again, he was sent to prison. It's like our system keeps us down. Like there's no way for them to overcome situations like that. Like it's just very unfortunate and it wouldn't have occurred if it weren't for the color of his skin.
That was a good share. I really like that.
All right, we can move on to the next topic. All right, I'm gonna be still discussing pretrial detention. Another racialized issue is the bail system. The bail system requires people awaiting trial and sentencing to provide monetary bail before release. Defendants who can't post bail are in prison until the finality of the proceedings. The ability to post bail is exceptionally important, but the determination of bail amounts is racialized. African Americans defendants are subjected to higher bail solely due to their race and perceived stereotypes, with African American bail being set 35% higher than whites. Furthermore, the bail system disadvantages African Americans more due to the economic disparity that stems from the racialized history, and as a result, they're less likely to afford bail. the current system has forced African Americans to be unable to pay. And this bail disparity is extremely dangerous, as those who cannot afford bail are forced into choosing between campaigning for their innocence through trial proceedings where they'll remain incarcerated for a long period of time. They don't know when they'll be released, all while they're unable to work, go home, or see their family. It's very mentally draining and you just feel detached from the whole world. Or you can take a plea deal, where they, by pleading guilty, can return quickly to their former lives. This is not really an option as it forces people to plead guilty simply to get out of jail. The criminal justice system is exceedingly unfair to African Americans and has geared itself to imprisoning and criminalizing them. The system shouldn't force people to think my best course of action here is to plead guilty. It's really flawed, and to have it disproportionately affect African Americans is horrendous. My question for you guys is, do you think that the bail system allows for a fair trial? And do we even need the bail system?
Giovanni, you made a lot of good points, and I don't think the bail system is necessary. It's definitely a way to keep minorities down. If people were privileged with having money, for instance, they'd be able to afford their bail, pay for a good lawyer, and maybe never even have to do time compared to people who are brought into unfortunate situations and don't have the means to pay for bail. And even then, they are probably still going to be criminalized. There's just not always, like, it's not very hopeful for them.
I also want to add on about the bail system or the cash bail system. I don't think it's fair or necessary to be put into the criminal justice system. Some states already have got, or they already got rid of their bail system. I think it was New Jersey who implemented a system that holds people in pretrial detention based solely on the danger and the flight risk that they pose. And so I don't think it should be kept into our system.
Yeah, I just want to add on that, like, with the bail system, I just think it's weird that, like, especially in a criminal justice system with courts, I think it's weird to like kind of monetize justice, right? Because why are we bringing money into a system where we're supposed to like uphold like the rules and keep the peace? I just think it seems targeted, right? Bail seems like obviously they think the peace is not within like minorities or something along that line.
Yeah, I believe like money shouldn't be involved when it comes to the criminal justice system as far as your rights, as far as punishment. There really is no point of that. And New Jersey's been able to show that they've been fine without it. So I don't get why it can't work for anybody else.
I feel like in general, the bail system is not only unfair for African Americans, but overall the people that are in that are that have low income or they don't have money. So in general, it's unfair for everybody. Unless you have money, and then it's fair for you, which is not right.
All right. Christine will discuss police interaction as well as racial profiling with both Black and white individuals as well. She will also display real videos of how African Americans are treated in our criminal justice system.
Thanks, Giovanni. We'll be looking at how body camera footage exposes differences in how people of color and white individuals interact with the police. Police agencies use body cameras and they have been praised as an instrument for accountability as well as transparency. However, do these videos really show differences in how people are treated according to their race? We'll be examining a couple of research to determine that. Wearing body cameras, I think one of the studies said that wearing body cameras did not lower police and their use of force. Rather, according to the study by Ariel et al., published in the European Journal of Criminology, it just increased assault against cops. And this challenges the notion that body cameras alone cannot solve issues of police misconduct. A second study by Kale and Hammock also draws attention to the problem of bias in recorded evidence or the body cam footage, especially in body camera footage from police. Reports in the media have highlighted certain incidents in which body camera videos showed glaring racial disparities in police interaction.
Clifford Owensby, as seen on this body camera footage released by Dayton, Ohio police, repeatedly explained to officers that he was a paraplegic and had no use of his legs.
I can't get out of the vehicle, sir.
Owensby was pulled over September 30th in a white Audi in Dayton, Ohio. Police say it was seen leaving a suspected drug house.
You can cooperate and get out of the car, or I'll drag you out of the car.
The police-released video was edited. NBC News cannot confirm what happened before or after.
Oh, you hurt me. You hurt me, bro.
The officers forcibly pull Owensby out of the car by his hair, pinning him to the ground.
Somebody help! Somebody help! Can y'all call the real police, please?
Then dragging him towards the police vehicle. Police say they found more than $22,000 in the car. The narcotics canine dog signaled it had been in close proximity to illegal drugs.
I feel like they need to train their officers to deal with disabled people in a more efficient manner, you know, treat them with respect.
But the Dayton Fraternal Order of Police defending the officers, saying they offered to assist Owensby, but sometimes the arrest of non-compliant individuals is not pretty. The mayor of Dayton calling the video very concerning, adding a full investigation is already underway. Molly Hunter, NBC News.
First video, it was about a man who is paraplegic, who has a disability, and he was traffic stopped by a cop. What did you guys think about that video?
I thought it was definitely sad to see. He wasn't resisting or not following orders, rather than he physically couldn't get out his car. It's sad to see how police treat him. They pulled him and dragged him out by his hair. His shoes came off. It's not right.
No, I think overall that interaction was just extremely disrespectful. It just goes to show that that officer had no remorse for what he was doing in the moment. He felt like it was necessary to do that even after announcing he was paraplegic and grabbing him by the hair. And like you said, his shoes coming off and being dragged to the back of the squad car. It's just not okay. They're trained better to deal with those situations.
I
Yeah,
feel oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add that, like, let's say this officer, like, he wasn't like that in the beginning, right? Let's say maybe it was his training that led him to take that course of action. I think that it still doesn't justify what he did, right? If that was his own conscience or that was what he was trained to do, it still shows that there's something wrong with him, like this police officer or the training he went under. Something's missing there.
Yeah, in that video too, I think they were talking about the dog was able to find that the money was around substances or like drugs, but they didn't really find drug in his car. So it was definitely like sad to like see the officer just mistreat this individual just according to his race that way. And if it was, I guess if it was somebody who's white, he would have not treated him like that.
I have a question for you guys because I was thinking about it throughout the video as well. Do you think the officers would have used as excessive force if he was able to walk? Or do you guys feel like they took advantage of the situation because he wasn't able to walk?
I think they would have probably used just as much force, if not maybe even a little more.
Yeah, I agree. It's just because of his race, and it's sad. It's really sad.
And Christine, back to what you were saying about the dogs claiming to have smelled that the money was around drugs. I definitely feel like that's just an excuse they said to justify their actions because, after all, he was a criminal. No, that's definitely not the case.
Any other questions before we move on to the next video? No? Okay.
That West Side man says he spent 4 days in jail and was charged with aggravated battery to an officer. But he says video of the incident shows police were the aggressors. Police body cams captured video, but not audio of the encounter. The image is now at the heart of a federal civil rights lawsuit.
Man, it left me feeling traumatized, man. I ain't gonna lie. You get nervous, you get even more nervous once you see the police.
Leroy Kennedy says he was walking to a store last August in Humboldt Park when 2 Chicago police officers ran up to him, slammed him against a brick wall, and smashed his head onto the sidewalk more than once.
I told him, like, sir, I'm not resisting. I just want to get my glasses. He slammed me again, thinking I'm resisting.
The officers are soon surrounded by angry witnesses at the scene. The video appears to show Kennedy wobbling as he's led away in handcuffs. He says he suffered a concussion, as well as cuts to his face and hand and wrist injuries. In this police report, officers say they confronted Kennedy because he had a shocked look on his face when he saw police. And officers say they thought Kennedy was attempting to conceal a firearm. But no weapon or drugs were found. And later, after supervisors arrived, the officers appeared to have little to say.
What's he arrested for? They instantly started fighting. But you don't know what you're arrested for? The police couldn't even pretend he did anything. So you have a police report which gives no description of a crime and no reason for approaching him other than his bulging eyes.
All charges against Kennedy were later dropped. The city's law department did not return our request for comment. And a CPD spokesperson said the department does not comment on pending litigation.
Hey, if you like that video,
So that next video was about a man who was just walking down the street in a sidewalk, and police officers came towards him, saying that he just seemed to look shocked that he was that the police was there when they showed up. What do you guys think about that video?
I thought the reason for the stop was like, it's totally wrong because like you're criminalizing normal, non-criminal behavior, you know? Like he was just there. Like if I see a policeman, I'm also gonna be like a little more tense. And like it's normal behavior, but like they took that as an excuse to like search him and like rough him up.
Yeah, the worst part about that video was that one of the cops were also African American, right? So what that tells me is that it's kind of like a learned, it's learned racism, I guess, if I wanted to make a term. He kind of learned to racially discriminate against his own people because that's what he was taught maybe in the academy. And I think there's something very wrong with that. Right? Honestly, like morally, ethically, something's not right with like police officers or law enforcement in general, or maybe our system.
Definitely. They had no reasonable cause or suspicion to search him. He had nothing on him. He was simply just walking.
An just brought up about the police officer being African American. I think it has to do with the badge, like the badge itself, the power, and having authority over other people. I think even if you're just like white person who's like trying to become a cop, like you're gonna feel a little bit more entitled than before you were a cop. It's like a mentality thing, I believe. And he probably also knows that like people like him are more prone to police brutality, and he still managed to do that to somebody else.
Guys? What's up? Is this your car?
Well, it's a rental right now. My car's in the shop.
Okay. Did something break down?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. You guys just came from over the park, right?
Yeah, we're just hanging out.
That's it?
That's what
Is this your car?
I just told you my car's in the shop. Obviously, this is a rental.
Okay. How do you start it?
What do you mean? I just put my foot on the brake and I put it in drive and I
Okay.
drive, officer.
So it's your car, though? Did they give you a fob or something?
My car, officer.
Did they give you a key fob or something? Or
Yes, sir. Officer.
like, what does it do? Does it?
You see, this that should let you know that it's in.
Okay. Do you have any weapons on you or in the car?
No, officer.
Okay, can I be honest with you? It smells like marijuana in the car, and I can see shake on the ground. And your buddy's giving me the idea that maybe he's got a gun. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I think.
How?
I don't know. Just the way. I mean, just the way you're holding yourself, man. Like, that's why we're nervous, man. That's it. You don't got no weapons on you? Go ahead and step out, Montre. Yep, I just told you why. 3 times. You want me to recap again?
Officer, look, my hands is up.
Yep, your hands are up, and now I'm asking you to step out of the car.
I gave you my ID.
You gave me your ID.
Go run it.
Yep, I don't want to. I'm not walking away from this car. If you don't want to go to jail, I would expect you to please listen. I mean, I told you I'm a cop. Face the car when you step out. Face the car when you step out. Face the car when you step out. Don't flex. Don't flex. I don't know what you're doing, man, but you need to knock that off. Stop pulling on your arms.
Is there marijuana shake on the floor of the car?
Officer, that was cigarette ash, okay? You didn't find no marijuana.
I'm not charging you with marijuana. But here's what. If you want me to be real with you, like I want you to be real with me for a second. Like, did I make that up? You know what I mean? Did I make it up?
I believe so, officer.
Do you have any questions?
What do you guys think about that video?
It enraged me. Again, they're just racially profiling him. And he even asked him, how do you turn on the car? As if he stole it and as if it wasn't his and he didn't know. I also thought it was wrong that he said his passenger looked suspicious and looked like he had weapons on him. I think they were just nervous, as anyone would be, because again, sometimes African Americans are shot just because.
Yeah, and also in the video, when the officer was also tapping on the camera, almost like trying to turn it off or cover it from recording, that's also kind of like a very suspicious thing to do during a traffic stop, because he kind of goes to show that he had malicious intentions with that traffic stop.
And then also, like, he kind of like was using his power like overly, because like he kept on saying, don't worry, I'm a police officer, I'm a police officer. Well, like he's not really taking into perspective like the other side, because like he doesn't know what's happening. He is scared because like he says you might have a weapon. That's like immediate threat to life, you know? And also like at the end where like he was all like, was I making that up? What are you supposed to say against like a police officer at that instance, you know? Would you go against them and like you're kind of risking yourself, you know?
I feel like in these cases, when it comes to African Americans being traffic stopped and stuff like that or pulled over, it's even if they try to cooperate with the cops or the police officer, they still are treated or mistreated very differently compared to white people, and that's solely because of their race. And they s- and it's like, even though they're recording, or like the body cameras are recording all of these, society still thinks that, oh yeah, the police was right because he's a police officer. They tend to believe their words more compared to the people who are victims of these traffic stops and who are racially profiled. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'll move on. So those videos are actual incidents highlighted, or that highlights the need for reviewing of body camera footage in order to comprehend the nuances of police encounters. And we just discussed of what we saw and what stood out to us. So I have another video here that discusses a groundbreaking study from Stanford University on the differences in how police treat white and black individuals during traffic stops. The purpose of the study was to apply computational linguistic approaches to analyze police discourse during stops in order to identify any patterns or differences in treatment between black and white people. In the video, as opposed to black drivers who often got no explanation at all, white drivers were more frequently told why they were stopped early in their interaction with the police.
We're at Stanford University because we've been invited to join in action a groundbreaking study into the differences between how police officers treat black people and white people. So tell me about your project here.
So we've been working with the Oakland Police Department on analyzing footage from body-worn cameras. They clip them on the front of their uniform. And let me just show you a piece of footage, actually, that comes from a stop from one of these cameras.
Can you turn the car off for me, sir? Is the engine off?
How much footage do you have?
Oakland has had footage for maybe nearly 7 years now, and so there's a huge amount of footage. Well, we're interested in stepping back and actually looking at the footage as data, and to not just look at the footage for one case, but to look at the footage for all of these stops.
What kinds of patterns do you think you could detect?
Well, we want to look to see, for example, if African Americans are treated any differently from white Americans during these stops. And we're using these computational linguistic tools help us to understand the language used in these stops.
Yeah, do you have your driver's license with you, sir?
What Eberhardt's researchers have found sheds new light on how police officers across America treat white people and black people.
Pretty good. We're going to pull you over. You got a brake light out back there on your passenger side. You aware of it?
Oh, if I get out this second, I can fix it.
All right.
Put your hands behind your back.
Why did y'all stop me for what?
Face away.
Why did you stop me?
So what I'm interested in is not just what the officer is saying, but when they're saying it. And it turns out that the order in which the officers say things matters a lot.
So what does one of these conversations typically look like?
So a typical conversation starts with a greeting, goes on to giving the reason for the stop, and then giving the documents, or asking for documents.
License and registration, please. Yep. What has your data told you about the differences between the script that a white person receives and the script that a black person receives?
Based on our analysis of around 1,000 stops, what we see is that white motorists are given the reason for the stop more earlier on in the conversations and more consistently than black motorists. And sometimes black motorists are not given the reason for the stop at all.
Wow.
It's the other side here, your brake light.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay.
I get it.
All right.
So I'm looking specifically at respect. And once we can identify these particular things about the officer's language, we can make an estimate of sort of their overall respectfulness at any given time. And so a key part of that is looking at how particular kinds of words are being used more when an officer is speaking to a black person versus a white person.
Right. Apologizing, reassurance, formal titles.
Those, for instance, we would traditionally think of as pretty respectful, and it turns out that they're significantly more common in stops when the officer is talking to a white community member.
Wow, but questions where they're probing for more information, informal titles.
Like dude and bro and man.
Right. Oh, wow, and hands on the wheel. I can tell you right now, I have never been told to put my hands on the wheel.
Those words are more common in stops with black community members.
Wow.
A surprising fact is that if we just look at the words that were used by the officer, we can predict the race of the person that they're talking to about 2/3 of the time.
Wow, even if you don't know the race of the person that was stopped, you can tell it from how that person was spoken to. That's crazy.
A black person who gets pulled over is worried about how they're going to be treated.
I do have a firearm on me.
Don't reach for it then.
They see these officer-involved shootings on television. They know other people who've been pulled over.
I can't breathe over there.
They've heard stories about negative interactions. How is this going to go for me? Right? That's what they're thinking. How is this going to go for me?
So according to the video, what did you guys see, or like what were your observations at all about the study?
I think it was interesting that with people looking at the way like the police officer would use his words and not know who they were talking to, they were able to determine the race and get it right almost every single time.
Yeah, I just want to add it on to that. It's kind of like how you change the way you talk depending on like the certain people you see. Um, in this case, it's kind of used like in a malicious way, and it could be connected to like racial profile because maybe like if they don't talk this way to this certain group, maybe it's kind of like a comfort thing for them because if they don't act all tough to like these minority groups, maybe they don't feel like they're in power, and I think maybe that's might be a reason why, but that's just me.
Yeah, in the video, I like how it showed the disparities, especially when it came to the lady who was pulled over, who was asking, "Oh, what did I do wrong?" When the police officers just literally arrested her right there and then, or like detained her. They didn't give her a proper explanation, as well as like compared to the white man who was pulled over, who was being spoken to very politely, like being asked, like the police officer seems more laid back, not so tense compared to the black lady who was arrested. So it definitely shows disparities among race. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that goes back to what Anne was saying about racial profiling, because they interact with people who they assume are criminals, they're just right off the bat aggressive. They expect pushback, so they are just immediately aggressive. They don't even give them a chance. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to move on. Furthermore, according to a study cited by the Los Angeles Times, police handle Black and white individuals differently. And you can tell this even in the police officer's tone, like in the video, emphasizing how widespread racial bias is in law enforcement. Also, moreover, according to Hudson's study, which was published in Science, body camera footage also highlights concerning pattern in which people speak less politely to Black drivers than to the whites, which is also which was also seen on the video that I just showed. The results definitely sheds light on the regular abuses that people of color endure or minorities when they interact with the police. So when we compare body camera footage of police interactions, what can we observe? So the data suggests that racial treatment varies greatly compared to the white people and people of color, who are they are treated with less courteous treatment, and the police are more aggressive when it comes to the questioning, and their stops are longer. So in conclusion, the analysis of body camera footage provides compelling evidence of racism in police interactions. And by examining the way police officers carry out stops, the language they use, and how much force they also use can reveal disparities that demand attention and reform, not just in not just in the law enforcement system, but overall in our criminal justice system. Now, here to discuss the problems associated with zero-tolerance policing, Jalissa.
Thanks, Christine. So today we're also tackling the topic of zero tolerance policing. It's an approach hailed for its crime reduction potential, but often criticized for its unintended consequences. While zero tolerance policing aims to crack down on minor offenses to prevent more serious crimes, it's not without controversies. One of the major issues is its disproportionate impact on marginalized communities, particularly people of color and those from low-income backgrounds. In this case, African American people face zero tolerance policing more because it's targeting their own communities and other minority communities. So just like earlier, what Christine mentioned with Stephanie mentioned in her example of crack cocaine being different sentencing for crack cocaine. So despite similar rates of drug use across racial and ethnic groups, studies have consistently shown that individuals from minority communities are disproportionately targeted and arrested for drug-related offenses. This perpetuates cycles of poverty and marginalization within these communities, just like with what An was touching on about, as well as earlier when Giovanni was talking about pre-trial, they get arrested for drug crimes and then they have to pay exceptionally more to get themselves out, which keeps them inside of jails, also causing overcrowding. So also the role of racial profiling in zero tolerance policing. There's many urban areas where these policies are implemented. Law enforcement officers may disproportionately target individuals from minority communities for stop searches and arrests. This not only undermines trust in law enforcement, but also contributes to feelings of injustice and inequality for the community. So it causes the community to distrust the police. Oftentimes that leads to not calling in any type of crimes when they are occurring because they don't trust the police presence. By focusing solely on strict enforcement, zero tolerance policing can exacerbate existing disparities within the criminal justice system. That's why many are calling for more equitable and community-centered approaches to law enforcement. So what's your guys' take on zero tolerance policing? Because it has its cons, but has mostly more cons than pros, but there are a little bit of pros because I think personally, like, zero tolerance policing only works if there's high crimes, but those high crimes tend to be in low minority communities, which, like you take Skid Row, for example. out in Los Angeles, like there needs to be some type of patrol there just to keep it kind of sanctioned. But then you take like other neighborhoods like where Stephanie lives, and you know, like zero tolerance, like automatically getting a light shine in your face while being just driving home. So what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's definitely like a step up from what I was talking about in like warrior side policing. I think it's definitely more focused on it has the intentions of getting criminals off the streets, lowering crime rates because they really want to be hard on crime. Back something like that. I think President Nixon said that, right? And then, but I think it just completely backfires because again, this loophole where it can be used, it can be used, like as like people of minorities, it can be used that like there's so much discretion when it comes to like law enforcement that like a lot of these systems can be easily abused.
Right. And alternatives like community and problem-oriented policing prioritize building relationships and addressing the root causes of the crime rather than just enforcing the law. So I feel like it's important to find the balance between maintaining public safety and ensuring fairness and justice for all members of society, because it's something that hasn't been able to be hand in hand with each other.
Back to what you were saying about how I feel about zero tolerance. Already the system has failed us. It's not fair. And people are already penalized for minor crimes. And it's so negatively impacted and shines a light on just minority groups and low-income communities. If zero tolerance policing were to take effect, then I feel like low-income communities would just be affected more, and it would continue this ongoing cycle of injustice.
Yeah, I think zero tolerance policing definitely targets minorities, and it's negative, like you said, because it'll definitely bring up our prison rates up. Like people are more incriminated, so the prison rates are going to go up. Definitely more funding when it comes to that, and as well as people of minorities are technically left with no choice. Like even if they do commit a crime, like they know their consequences. They know that they're gonna get punished for it. So they're gonna undermine the consequences and still commit crime. Like if the point of policing in general is to punish people for committing a certain crime so they don't do it again, it won't work because it's a whole cycle where people are just going to continue to commit crime. So either way, it's negative.
Right. It's always a vicious cycle for sure, especially with African Americans and minorities. Um, Especially like subjecting them as a criminal and labelization of being a criminal. It has long-term life effects, negative, like very negative impacts. They can't, purchase a house. They can't acquire a job. They can't even ask for government assistance, which helps with those types of things. So it's it's meant to set minorities up for failure and keep them, like earlier we mentioned, like it's kind of like kicking them when they're already down. They're already treated differently. They're already punished more harshly than others. And we have to be more aware. We have to be more fearful of those officers. So yeah, it's just a very deeply rooted issue in our criminal justice system.
I'd like to add that it's not just a system affecting adults, it also affects juveniles. Because like over policing also applied in like schools. I don't know if you guys know about the school to prison pipeline, where like schools issue like referrals to the justice system. and African American juveniles are more likely to receive those referrals for the same offense. I saw a study where like they're 60% more likely to get a referral for a violent offense compared to their white counterpart. So like it's really targeting them early and when they're down. So like it just keeps on criminalizing them.
Yeah, and once you're the first time you're arrested, you're labeled with that being a criminal. It's you have such a higher chance to keep going in and out of jail. And then that's also like, for example, like I come from my father was like incarcerated. So like growing up and seeing that cycle, like obviously like I could have followed towards those footsteps. Luckily, like I was the like part of the lucky bunch that decided to steer far away from that, but not everybody does it. Like it becomes so normalized and people become desensitized to that type of stuff. And that's a normal life for them when it's not, it shouldn't be a reality for minorities to deal with that.
Thank you for sharing. That was good.
To tie it all together, I think policies like the zero tolerance could also be correlated to our overall history. When it was in slavery, it was incarcerating criminals. And those criminals were sometimes, arrested and incarcerated for the black codes. And when it wasn't the black codes, it was Jim Crow laws. And when it wasn't that, it was the war on drugs. There's always something to take place of something else, but essentially it just keeps us down. No real change is being made because minorities and low income people will continue to be incarcerated and criminalized. I think history and our past events should be a tool to help us not to repeat history, to make it better. Seeing everything we discussed, I feel like not much has changed, and we should really reflect upon that and ask ourselves, what can we do? How can we change this?
I agree. I feel like definitely our generation are definitely more educated in this type of subject when it comes to disparities and racism. We're more likely to be speaking about the problem. So I definitely see potential in our generation into making a change or reform when it comes to our criminal justice system.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the media exposure with these types of instances happening more and more. It's very important to keep that idea alive that racism is very real, especially with criminal justice and policing. African Americans are mainly a target, and we have to keep acknowledging it. As much as we don't like to, as much as we don't want to, it has to be acknowledged.
Yeah, I just want to bring up this concept, which like this whole discussion reminds me of, and that's the ship of Theseus. And just a brief explanation of what that is. So basically, you have a brand new ship, and over time, wear and tear, and then you start replacing with old parts and new parts, and that's what really this all reminds me of. It's like we're taking racism as like the base, we're taking out like all the bad parts people don't like, but then we're just adding in these like new parts that don't seem like racism, but really it's just like hidden under like a disguise. And we still have like the same ship from before. It's the same problem. It's still here in the United States. And really there's been some change, but there hasn't been enough to the point where this is still a huge problem. Not just in the criminal justice system, but I guess in society in general.
Yeah, I think that reforms are definitely needed, and whether it be through changing police styles or abolishing bail, we really have to do something about it because it's just the same the same racism under a different name,
I think tying it all together with our ethics class, I feel like our beliefs and what we believe in and our cultural background should definitely be put aside to prevent biases when it comes to our criminal justice system. It take into shouldn't be a factor where it affects how we treat other people, and like there shouldn't be disparities when it comes to that stuff.
That's a wrap. We were Justice Unveiled. Thanks for listening.